Dune Prophecy's second episode splits up the Harkonnen sisters and continues the trend of ending on a WTF moment. Although this week it was less of a WTF exclamation point and more of a WTF question mark. Question mark was one of the good variety though. More what exactly is happening here rather than what that makes no sense. It also feels like with some of the heavy lifting involved with setting the table out of the way, we can get a better idea of what the show's trying to do and how it's situating itself within the Dune universe. The excitement at the end is again related to Desmond Hart, with the mystery surrounding what's going on with him continuing to be the most compelling thing the show has introduced as far as I'm concerned. I wouldn't say we got significantly closer to an answer on that, but we did get many more details to consider. There's also some interesting tension between the sisters at the center of this story it seems like we're supposed to pick up on, especially at the beginning of the episode while it's leaning into this idea of loyalty to the sisterhood above all, loyalty to family, and where it stands between the actual sisters is something it feels like we're supposed to keep an eye on. The episode opens with another ship arriving on Wallach IX, and the Suk Dr. Nazir, who came to examine Kasha's remains, leads by telling Tula that it's been a long time since she studied there, but she's still a sister first. The diamond tattoo on her forehead might look familiar. Dr. Yui had the same one in the movies. This is something the movie never got into that deeply, but those are there to show that not only are the doctors who come from the Suk school some of the best in the Empire, but also the story is that they are conditioned in a way that they could never take a human life. That's why they're so trusted and these powerful people let them in to become their personal doctors. Dr. Yui then was the first case of this conditioning being broken by House Harkonnen before he betrayed House Atreides. This doctor isn't surprised that no accelerant was found on Kasha, as she says the heat source was internal. Other than that, her initial exam was inconclusive, and it'll take time to get the results from further testing. When Tula passes this on to Valya, she finds out about Pruitt Richesi dying the same way, and with Kasha out of the picture, Valya has to travel to Salusa Secundus and take care of the situation herself. This is where the tension I brought up comes in. Both actors do a good job of portraying this sense that there are a lot of unsaid things hanging over this conversation. It does come up briefly with Tula questioning her sister's faith in her ability to run the school while she's gone. But the real issue is that Valya believes this is the burning truth that Raquella warned them of, and knows that her sister won't like what she thinks they have to do next. In the first episode, they established that Lila and Theodosia were each of their favorites. Valya chooses to take Theodosia with her for that reason. Then it's also revealed that Lila is Raquella's great-great-granddaughter. This is the thing from her lineage they mention that makes her a natural candidate to be a Reverend Mother. And this direct relation to Raquella means that she could help them if she takes the Rossak drug and can access her genetic memory. I didn't get into the process of becoming a Reverend Mother and the agony in my episode 1 video because there was so much else to cover, and I hope they do that themselves. If you've watched the movies, you've seen Jessica take the water of life with the Fremen Reverend Mother. At the time the show takes place, they take something else called the Rossak drug. I won't get into the details because they still might go back and explain things through Valya's, Tula's, or even Dorothea's agony and flashbacks. But the important thing here is that Raquella was the first to survive this process. She was poisoned, she unlocked the genetic ability to render the toxin harmless using her body chemistry, and she goes through this experience that they refer to as the agony. It awakened her genetic memories, she became the first Reverend Mother, and then tried to refine the process over time so that other people could take it. In the Brian Herbert book, several young sisters die in this process until Dorothea survives and becomes the second, with Valya and Tula following later on. In the show, it's implied that Kasha and perhaps their other friend Francesca, who we haven't seen yet as an adult, also completed the process. As she talks about the risks involved, Tula brings up their names and how the secrets they've gone to great lengths to keep could be exposed if Lila is willing to go through with her agony. I was guessing this is about Valya using the voice on Dorothea and how that group we saw coming together after Raquella passed away took control of the sisterhood. We'll see that it is related to that, and considering that Francesca was there when Dorothea met her demise, and that there were a lot of news articles about the casting of the Indian movie star Taboo in that role, I expect that this is going to come back up. Unfortunately, things don't go well for Lila, who we learn is motivated by her devotion to the sisterhood who raised her, Tula in particular, who she looked to as a mother figure, but also by the belief that she might encounter her biological mother if she gains access to her genetic memories. As far as it goes, Tula doesn't force Lila to take the poison, and doesn't guarantee that she'll meet her mother in the other memory. Still, she does allow her to believe it's a possibility, and because they're so close, we can imagine she'd know that would be something that might help her make the decision they wanted her to make. They do get what they were hoping for. Raquella passes the cryptic message through Lila saying, "The key to the reckoning is one born twice. Once in blood and once in spice. A revenant full of scars, a weapon born of war on a path too short." What's also supposed to be happening simultaneously is that Lila would be using her own metabolism to neutralize the poison's effect and turn it into a benign substance, just like Mother Raquella did. In this case, it doesn't happen, and tragically, as she thinks she's making contact with her mother, it turns out to be her grandmother, who we find out is Dorothea, and we understand why Tula and Valya were worried that their secrets might come out. And she sends the message to the Harkonnens that they stole her future and now she's taking their hope before Lila succumbs to the poison. While none of this is exactly what I imagined the agony to be like reading about it, I thought they did a pretty good job with it. I was expecting her to make it, and I definitely wasn't expecting Dorothea to make an appearance out of nowhere, which brings up a lot of new questions. But the real kicker here gets to the heart of prophecy. Raquella's words could apply to Desmond, and will certainly lead the sisters in his direction, but if you've read ahead, they could also be applied to things, and that's plural, that happened thousands of years later in the main series. Overall, things are starting to get interesting on Wallach IX, and they introduce some internal conflict developing with the acolytes surrounding Lila's decision. Sister Emmeline is all for it, and talks about life being sacred and how there's no greater honor than sacrificing it. She drops a little history about her family doing that in service of Reyna Butler during the Machine Wars, and stresses that Reverend Mothers know better than anyone that the dead aren't gone. She's there to argue for going through with the agony, but it also makes you wonder if that means we'll see Lila again in the same way Dorothea made a return. Jen is the voice against, and makes some good points about the sisterhood not caring about them as individuals and only about the order itself and their plans. On Salusa Secundus, it's more of a palace intrigue vibe, and Duke Richezi is calling for vengeance after the death of his son and heir. Their house makes their money in tech, and the fleet they use to secure the royal union becomes the thing they can hold over the emperor's head as they call for justice. In the last episode, Javicco admitted that without it, he fears he'll lose Iraq and the support of the great houses will go with it. So it's his wife that steps up here to buy some time by blaming Pruitt's death on the little thinking machine that got loose during the party. This may be her seizing the opportunity now that Kasha's out of the way, but she seems more decisive and possibly more ruthless than her husband. She has the thinking machine card and plays it, and spends the rest of the episode trying to improve her hand. The Duke's daughter has been throwing looks at Constantine in every scene that she's been in, and they get together in a steamy scene that takes place on the grounds in what I can only think to describe as a sex tree. Like his sister the princess, Lady Richezi feeds him some drugs and plays him a bit by getting him to talk about how plugged in he is. She opens the door by laying out that the true power in the Empire comes from controlling Arrakis and its spice, and he ends up spilling that that's where the suspect they have in custody is from. His father takes this information and gets into it with the Emperor, demanding to see the prisoner that his bastard admitted was being held. Things get heated and he's about to take his ships off the table or worse, and then Valya shows up, and she's able to signal to his truthsayer to get him out of there. She also sees that the Emperor is lying about the prisoner, tells him about what happened to Kasha, and then demands to see Desmond Hart herself, since if he's responsible for Pruitt, he might know what happened to Kasha if he didn't just kill her himself. By the time she arrives, Desmond has already happily admitted to killing the boy. He says he did it for the Emperor, who maintains that he definitely didn't ask him to. And Desmond just sort of smiles and is like, of course you didn't, but you wanted it to happen and it did, so yeah, I did it. I did it for you, and I can do it again. Mark Strong does a good job of showing us that the Emperor is thinking that this might be something he can use before he calls for the guards to take him into custody, and Travis Fimmel does a good job of just continuing to smile while they take him away to show that Desmond picked up on that. There is one other development that isn't directly related to Desmond Hart. Kieran Atreides is a spy. This is introduced in a scene where we see him mapping the interior of the palace, and at first I thought, wow, the Swordmaster is really going the extra mile in beefing up security after the incident. Turns out he's part of a rebel group that's connected with the nightclub where Inez ran into him. And it's funny because their leader brings up his relative Vorian Atreides. This is the person that Valya refers to in the opening montage when she makes her point about her family getting a bad rap in the history of the Machine Wars, and also the character whose parts I found the least interesting in the book Sisterhood of Dune. Apparently, now that they know the layout, the rebels just need one more piece before they can move against the Corrinos. Kieran wonders if it might not be the best time, since the tragedy surrounding the wedding is earning them some sympathy, and when his loyalty comes into question, he explains that he joined the rebellion because the great houses are hoarding spice, forcing the people to violence to get what they need to survive. It's a spice access rebellion. When Valya goes to see her underworld contact to get the names of the rebels so she can burn them and use them as a bargaining chip with the Emperor, we see that this was all part of their manipulation to get the wedding to go through. But since at least by the end of the episode she's lost her chance to expose the group, they'll likely cause problems in the future. There are feelings between the Swordmaster and the princess that come out in the scene they share, but she cuts off the sugar, saying that when she was leaving it was fine to indulge, but now things are different. In that scene we also find out what Kasha was getting at in the first episode when she was talking about when they first found Inez. I was a little confused since she said she was the princess, but Kasha said she'd been held captive for years. It turns out that she had been kidnapped with her brother, and because her family didn't want to look weak, they covered it up. She tells Kieran they're all just pieces on the board to be played in the pursuit of power and spice. This is also a fitting description of the situations the rebels find themselves in, even if they aren't aware of it. So Desmond spends the majority of the episode in the suspensor cells. The tech that makes it possible to nullify gravity and just sort of hang him there is the same tech that Baron Harkonnen used to move around. It utilizes this in-universe thing called the Holtzman effect, which is how they explain their shields and things like folding space for interstellar travel, and of course glow globes. One of the criticisms I've seen about the show is that things don't look terribly different given the 10,000 year gap, but look how much the glow globes have improved. Anyway, Javicco tells his wife about Desmond, and she immediately identifies the potential of having someone who can burn people to death on the spot on your side. When Valya is allowed to interview him, he doesn't appear to be trying to deceive her. He comes from the planet Balut, which she describes as a harsh world for a child. This is a name that didn't ring any bells for me, so I went looking and found that it only appears in some of the Brian Herbert books I haven't read. The interesting detail in the wiki is that his planet was devastated by the Jihad police and Tulaxa slavers to use for their organ farms. This is pretty well into the weeds, but from what I've read, cloned organs and tissues were grown in vats, cultivated on these farms, and then sold during the war. With limited info, this still sort of stands out because my initial guesses as to what was going on with him were also tied to Tulaxa. Without spoilers, there are some characters and things that are introduced in Dune Messiah and will likely be in the third movie when that comes out, so it's possible this could all be connected. Before we find out about that, he sticks with the story that he's nothing but a soldier of the Imperium. When he admits to killing Pruitt again, she realizes he's not worried about the consequences because he believes he did it for the Emperor. And while he doesn't come out and say that he killed Kasha, or how that could be possible since she died so far away, he does say he saw the corruption in her heart just as he can now see the blood trailing Valya's every step. She picks up on the word see and repeats it back to him as a question, while doing some Bene Gesserit stuff with her fingers. And he repeats his story that Shai-Hulud took his eye and granted him a gift to see what even she can't. He punctuates the statement with another one of his smiles, and it stands out that while he gladly killed a child without a shred of remorse, in a brutal way that he just was right there to witness, based on what we've seen the Sisterhood is capable of to this point, you kind of get where he's coming from. Invoking the worm causes the Empress to question who he serves, and when he says he serves the Imperium and only the Imperium, Valya is forced to contend that he's telling the truth, or at least what he believes to be true. The encounter puts her on the back foot. The Sisterhood has been largely unchecked in becoming the puppet masters of the powerful families, who then become dependent on them. With Desmond entering the picture, the treachery involved is on full display, and by the end of this interrogation, Desmond has emerged as someone more valuable to the Corrinos in their current situation. Also, the Emperor points out that Valya can't explain how Desmond killed Kasha halfway across the galaxy at the same time he was killing Pruitt, so unless she can give him some kind of proof, they're not really interested in giving him up. We'll see later that the Empress has an immediate plan to use his beautiful, terrible gift, and decides to free him from his cell to burn some fear into Duke Richese, who by now has reclaimed his fleet and threatened to take over Arrakis. It's an impressive and convincing display that doesn't give much away about the mechanism behind it. He essentially does the same thing he did before. He just looks at him and towards the end touches his forehead. The sound design has some interesting stuff going on in this scene and the one at the end, but nothing that's clear and conclusive. As impressive as this is, it's just a warm-up for the big confrontation at the end. When she returns, Valya's surprised to be greeted by Desmond, who is now just freely moving around. But she's not necessarily afraid because, you know, if push comes to shove, she can just use the voice on him. It doesn't take long for it to escalate there. It just takes him telling her that the Emperor is no longer in need of her services and that her access is revoked, and his stating in plain language that his goal is to wipe out every trace of Valya and the Sisterhood from the Empire. She uses the voice and it all seems to be going according to plan right up until he doesn't drive his blade into his throat. It's a huge surprise to everyone, possibly even Desmond, though it's hard to read what's going through his mind throughout the sequence. He does have a smile for her too, and says he always wondered what her greatest fear would be. Now he knows it's not that no one will hear her, it's that they'll hear her and just won't care. What are you going to say in response to that? I mean, it's just damning. So the episode ends as we watch a stunned Valya walk away. This is another strong ending with mystery piled on top of the other mysteries surrounding his character, who for all intents and purposes believes he survived being swallowed by a giant worm on Arrakis. That's almost certainly not the case, but I can't say I feel like I know what's really going on either. Part of my confusion is that almost any way you look at it, if he does believe he's been given a gift as he says, and can pass the test when the Bene Gesserit try to catch him in a lie, then there's someone behind the scenes that made his return possible, probably after his death. When we hear the grievances he has against the Bene Gesserit, are those coming from the puppet or the puppeteer? Or I guess both. Did something from his past related to the Sisterhood make him the perfect candidate for this job? Or is he just an empty shell that an opportunist has got their hands on? There are some subtle things in the performance that I think you'll be able to go back to after we get the explanation, and you'll be able to say, oh, it was right there in front of us. And I mentioned there's some stuff going on in the sound design that might be clues, but I don't know. I thought after he resisted the voice, he almost sounded like a different character. Like I thought the actor almost played him as a second character, but who knows, because he's been consistent in being all over the place throughout the performance. One area where the show is doing a good job is making it hard to pick a side, which is funny when one of the choices is a child murderer. The Sisterhood has enough skeletons in its closet that it would be satisfying to see Valya exposed and taken down by the end. At the same time, making Tula the good one seems a little boring, so where does that leave us? Because we do know the organization will still be around and still be pursuing this breeding program 10,000 years in the future. Speaking of Tula, I kept wondering if she knew that Lila wouldn't meet her mother in the other memory. Like she wasn't dead and wouldn't be there. And going back and rewatching the scenes, I don't think she was lying to her. If she was, she's a very good liar. And as bad as they've already been revealed to be, I don't see where the payoff of that twist that she's even worse would come from. I assume Lila didn't make it, but I'm not 100% sure. I mentioned that several acolytes died taking the Rossak drug in the books, but there's also a character, a member of the Corrinos family actually, who didn't successfully fight it off to become a Reverend Mother, but didn't die either. It just scrambled her thoughts and memories, so it's possible we might see something like that. Objectively, this was a much better episode of TV than the first. I think the idea of prophecy, how easy it is to misinterpret, and the lengths people go to because they want to believe in what they're doing will play a big part in the rest of the season. Also, Desmond being a bad guy or a tool for a bad guy to use doesn't make the Sisterhood the good guys. I can't wait to find out where his powers are coming from, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.